The massive Korth fleet glided silently through the void of space, its sleek warships and monstrous dreadnoughts cutting through the dark with frightening efficiency. The Korth had made a name for themselves as the galaxy's most ruthless conquerors, swift, methodical, and merciless. Their empire spanned dozens of worlds, and their technology was unmatched. They took what they wanted, wiped out those who resisted, and moved on to the next target. Earth, a small, seemingly insignificant blue planet in the far corner of the galaxy, was next. Commander Zaylor, the fleet's leader, stood at the helm of the flagship Indomitable, a massive craft that was the pride of the Korth fleet. His yellow eyes gleamed with confidence as he gazed out at the swirling mass of stars. Earth was already marked. Its fate was sealed. The Korth had scouted the planet and deemed it weak, primitive, too underdeveloped to mount any meaningful resistance. The planet's defenses were laughable, their technology rudimentary at best. The humans were nothing more than an inconvenience, a species that had barely scratched the surface of the stars. "I trust all systems are prepared for the operation, Commander," came the voice of Trellis, his second in command. Her voice was smooth, efficient, with none of the hesitation that might suggest doubt. "Of course," Zaylor responded, his tone dismissive. "The invasion will be swift. Earth will fall in a matter of hours." But as he spoke, a strange sensation tugged at the back of his mind. The Korth had always been methodical, always certain, but Earth felt different. He pushed the thought aside. It was nothing more than a lingering sense of curiosity, a feeling he'd never experienced before. The silence on the bridge was broken by an unexpected blip on the radar. A signal, a transmission. It wasn't supposed to happen. Earth's communications were primitive. The Korth had scanned the entire planet's transmission spectrum. There were no frequencies worth noting, no meaningful messages to intercept. Yet here was something. "Run a full diagnostic," Zaylor ordered sharply, his tone now colder. He didn't like surprises, especially not now, with Earth in his sights. Trellis worked quickly, her hands moving over the controls. "It's coming from Earth's surface. Unknown origin." The signal was weak, barely a whisper in the vastness of space. But it was there. And it was different. It wasn't a distress call or a plea for help, but something more cryptic. Static buzzed as the Korth command crew tried to decode it, but then the noise began to settle. A sound, a tune, emerged, one that immediately struck Zaylor as odd, even unsettling. "What is this?" Trellis muttered, listening intently. Song?" The melody was simple, almost childlike in its cadence. But there was something about it, a certain defiance embedded within the notes. The message was clear, despite the simplicity. "We will not go down easily." Galor's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" he thought, as an odd sensation began to creep into his mind. A challenge? From a species that still thought in terms of melody and rhythm? He couldn't fathom it. Surely it was just another example of the humans' primitive communication, nothing more than a remnant of their forgotten past. Yet, the longer he listened, the more he felt a strange flicker of curiosity. "Commander, it's repeating," Trellis said, her voice filled with an almost imperceptible note of intrigue. "The song is on a loop." Zaylor's gaze remained fixed on the display, the melody reverberating in his mind like a small pebble skipping across the surface of a pond. He hadn't expected to feel anything from a race of so-called lesser beings, but this was unsettling. "Increase the signal strength," he ordered, his voice steady, though his mind raced. "I want to hear everything." The hum of the ship's systems responded, amplifying the transmission. The song, now full-bodied, echoed throughout the bridge, a haunting, ancient melody from Earth's distant past. But it was what followed that made Zaylor's blood run cold. A voice, small yet defiant, pierced through the static. "We are coming, and we will fight." The message was brief but unmistakable. The Korth had underestimated humanity. And now, for the first time, Zaylor wasn't so sure that Earth would fall as easily as he thought. "Prepare to land," he ordered sharply, his voice now tinged with something far more serious. "We must learn more about this species." The song echoed again as the fleet moved closer to Earth, and the Korth commander felt the first flicker of doubt stirring deep within him. The Korth fleet hovered on the edge of Earth's atmosphere, their sensors scanning the planet in every possible frequency. The strange song, still playing in a loop, filled the bridge of the Indomitable. Zaylor stood unmoving, his yellow eyes fixed on the data streaming across the main screen. The message was increasingly clear. Humanity was not as helpless as they appeared, and they were ready to fight. "Commander," Trellis said, her voice carrying an edge of uncertainty, "we've been running diagnostic scans on the signal for hours. It's not just a song. It's layered with something else. Code. Patterns within the static." Sailor's eyes narrowed. Code? Why would humans, primitive creatures with no apparent understanding of galactic warfare, embed a code within a simple melody? He had assumed the transmission was a crude attempt at communication, nothing more than a relic of their distant past. But now it seemed far more deliberate. "Is it a trap?" Zaylor growled. The possibility unsettled him. "Not a trap," Trellis replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "It's more like a challenge." Zaylor turned toward her, intrigued. "Explain." Trellis hesitated. "The code is embedded in the melody, but it's not a simple encryption. It's a puzzle, a message disguised as noise. We're only beginning to decrypt it." The Korth had encountered encrypted messages before, but never from a species so far beneath them. The realization hit Zaylor like a sudden storm. Earth wasn't just trying to communicate, it was testing them. And somehow, the humans had known they would come. Zaylor motioned for Trellis to continue, his mind racing. "We've isolated fragments of text hidden within the transmission," she said, eyes scanning her data. "I'll need more time to fully decode it, but it seems to be a warning, a threat. They're preparing for us, not just defending their planet. They're preparing to engage us on their terms." A chill ran through Zaylor, though he refused to show any sign of weakness. He had always prided himself on his ability to remain calm in the face of uncertainty. But this was different. Earth's message wasn't just a plea for mercy or a cry for help. It was a declaration of war, delivered in the most unexpected form. The humans weren't begging for their lives. They were asserting their will to survive. "Send the decrypted message to the fleet," Zaylor commanded, his voice sharp. "I want every ship to receive it. Let them know this is no longer just an invasion. It's a challenge." Trellis nodded and sent the data, the encrypted message now unfolding on every Korth ship's display. Zaylor could almost feel the pulse of energy in the air, the collective tension of the fleet as they processed the data. The song, once just an oddity, had become a symbol of human defiance. The Korth weren't just facing a weak species. They were facing a species that had been preparing for this moment. As Zaylor watched the fleet's response, something unexpected happened. A series of human-made ships, small, ragtag vessels, began to emerge from Earth's atmosphere, darting toward the Korth fleet. They were nothing like the sleek warships of the Korth, barely armed with anything more than scrap metal and old technology, yet they moved with remarkable precision. "They're organizing," Trellis observed, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're not running. They're engaging us," Zaylor finished, his tone darkening. "Ready the fleet for intercept. We cannot underestimate these creatures any longer." But even as the Korth prepared to repel the humans' daring assault, a deeper realization settled over Zaylor. These humans, so seemingly primitive, had not only intercepted the message, but they were already mobilizing. They had taken the first step in what would be a long and bloody conflict. The music continued to play through the communication systems, a haunting reminder of the stubborn will of humanity. The melody, once dismissed, now echoed with a single truth. Earth was not just a target, it was a battlefield, and the Korth would have to earn their victory. As the first human ships rocketed toward them, Zaylor felt the weight of the moment. The song had stopped being just noise. It had become a challenge, a warning. And now, the Korth had no choice but to meet it head-on. "Let the war begin," Zaylor muttered, as the Korth fleet rumbled to life, ready to face the fight they had never expected. The human ships moved like insects, erratic, unpredictable, completely lacking the polished formation of an Imperial fleet. To the Korth, it should have been laughable. Yet, as Commander Zaylor watched the first wave of these crude vessels spiral toward his outer patrol ships, there was no humor in his expression. Visual confirmation on the Earthborne ships, Trailis reported. 13 in total. Weapons are minimal. Heat signatures suggest improvised engines, some barely holding together. Then why haven't we crushed them already? Zaylor snapped. He didn't like anomalies. In every campaign he'd led, the outcome was simple. Identify the target, overwhelm it with superior force, and move on. But Earth was violating the formula, the song, the code, and now this, an attack so audacious it bordered on suicidal. Because they know exactly what they're doing, Trailis replied, eyes locked on the tactical readout. Look, on the display, the 13 human ships broke formation. Not into disarray, but into deliberate chaos. They veered off and scattered vectors surrounding the lead Korth cruiser, Varric, before its gunners could track multiple targets. Then, one by one, the humans struck. Not with firepower, but tactics. One human ship dipped beneath the cruiser's sensor arc, latching onto its hull with magnetized claws. Another dove straight into the Varric's engine exhaust. Suicidal, yes, but it triggered a forced shutdown of the venting system, sending the cruiser into a temporary stall. Two more ships darted through the debris field, launching electromagnetic pulses that sent the cruiser's targeting systems haywire. Minimal casualties, Trailis noted, but their goal wasn't destruction. It was confusion. The cruiser, disoriented and unable to fire without risk of hitting its own fleet, drifted helplessly as the humans pulled away, having achieved what no race in recent history had managed, disabling a Korth warship without matching it in firepower. Zaylor stood frozen, jaw clenched. That was a test. Yes, Trailis said, and we just failed it. The humans retreated not in defeat but in victory, leaving a single message behind, beamed in clear galactic common to every Korth ship in the region. We learn. Fast. Silence hung heavy on the bridge. It wasn't the damage that alarmed Zaylor, it was the intent behind it. This hadn't been an act of desperation. It was calculated, coordinated, strategic. These weren't mindless primitives, they were thinkers, planners, and worse, they were bold. I want a full analysis of their tactics, Zaylor ordered, voice sharp but composed. Where did they learn to fly like that? Trailis didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, she said, From us. Some of the maneuvers they used, those are Korth training patterns. Old ones. Zaylor's blood chilled. They've been studying us. He stared at the image of Earth slowly rotating below them. A backwater world of oceans and forests. A species barely a few centuries removed from the invention of flight. And yet, they had just outmaneuvered a cruiser that had conquered planets. The game had changed. No longer was this an extermination mission. Earth had shown its hand. And now the Korth were beginning to understand. Humanity wouldn't go down fighting. They'd go down thinking, learning, evolving, and they'd drag the Korth into a war unlike any they had ever fought. Deploy ground scouts, Zaylor said coldly. I want boots on their soil. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. The war for Earth had begun, but it would not be fought with strength alone. The dropships sliced through Earth's upper atmosphere, black spears falling from the heavens. Inside them, Korth scouts braced for impact, each one an elite operative, bred for reconnaissance and precision. Their mission was simple: locate human command centers, map technological capabilities, and identify any true threat lurking beneath the surface. Commander Zaylor watched the descent from orbit, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He should have felt confident. The Korth had done this 100 times before, insert survey conquer, but unease lingered like static in the air. Scout teams deployed. Visual feed coming online, Trailis said, as the bridge lights dimmed, to highlight the transmission. Landing zones: 1 urban, 2 rural, 1 Arctic research facility. The feeds blinked to life. 4 separate landscapes, 4 points of contact. The one in the city, a sprawling metropolis called Chicago, was first to encounter resistance. At street level, the city appeared deserted. Scout Team Theta moved through alleyways with clinical efficiency, scanners sweeping for biosigns. No military personnel in sight. No active defense systems, just an eerie silence and abandoned vehicles. Then came the ambush. From the sewers, from rooftops, from inside buildings, humans attacked. Not soldiers, but civilians fighting with homemade railguns, drones, and electromagnetic traps. 1 Korth scout was neutralized before he could even draw his weapon. Another was taken out by an anti-armor mine disguised as a trash can. The entire encounter lasted 90 seconds before the Korth were forced to retreat under a smoke barrage. Zalor leaned in. Replay that footage. Slow. Trellis complied, and together they watched it again. Pause. There. See that drone? He asked, pointing. It was nothing like the standard Earth models the Korth had catalogued. Sleeker, with an energy signature that flickered like Korth stealth tech. Too advanced. Too familiar. That's ours, Trellis confirmed. Modified, stripped down, and repurposed. They've been salvaging from wreckage. Zalor turned away from the screen, jaw tightening. They've been preparing for this longer than we thought. The rural zones yielded even more surprises. In the Rockies, Korth scouts discovered an abandoned wind farm until it activated. The turbines retracted, revealing long-range ion cannons hidden beneath the blades, automated and solar-powered. The ambush left 2 scouts down and a 3rd captured. In the Arctic zone, Scout Team Nu vanished entirely. No distress signal, no trace. When satellite scans were pulled, the research station they had landed near was gone. Evacuated, covered in camouflage netting, replaced by what looked like a sensor array, aimed directly at orbit. They knew we were coming, Trellis said, quietly. No, Zalor replied. They've always known. He stood pacing for the first time in this campaign. Earth was supposed to be blind, unprepared, but instead, it was layered in traps, covered in secrets, and filled with a population that refused to roll over and die. These aren't isolated efforts. This is coordinated. That means leadership, infrastructure, planning. And something else, Trellis added. They're not just salvaging our tech, they're improving it. Zalor's silence was telling. Earth had never stopped evolving. In the shadows, behind their quiet transmissions and cultural distractions, humans had been studying everything, observing, waiting. And now they were no longer a target. They were a threat. Recall the scout teams. Prepare the fleet for tactical engagement, Zalor ordered. We've just lost the element of superiority. Above the Earth, the Korth fleet rearmed. Below, humanity was already 2 moves ahead. Alarms echoed through the command deck of the Indomitable. Red icons flared across the tactical displays. Earthships, dozens of them, breaking orbit. But this time, they weren't scrap-built decoys or suicide drones. These ships were new, sleek, fast, and undeniably dangerous. Commander Zalor stared at the projections, cold disbelief tightening his jaw. Those ships weren't in the initial scan. No, Trellis confirmed, her tone grim. They weren't there yesterday. The ships were like nothing the Korth had seen from Earth before, cobbled together from scavenged Korth hulls, retrofitted with alien engines but guided by something uniquely human, unpredictable innovation. Some ran on fission, others used modified plasma coils. None should have been capable of orbital maneuvering. Yet they moved with precision, swarming like hornets from a broken hive. Formation, Delta 3. Target the lead vessel, Zalor ordered, voice low and sharp, but the human ships didn't wait for the Korth to fire. They struck first. With the push of a command, a trio of Earth ships launched dense kinetic rods at one of the forward Korth destroyers. The rods weren't guided, just raw metal hurled at hypersonic speed, Simple, crude, devastating. The destroyer's shields absorbed the first impact, the second. But the third rod tore straight through its core reactor. The Korth ship exploded. In silence, the vacuum swallowing flame and metal alike. Gasps rippled across the bridge. Korth warships did not fall to such primitive tactics. Not since the early days of the Empire. They're using asymmetrical targeting patterns, Trellis muttered, typing furiously. They're not trying to win through force. They're dismantling us, one weakness at a time. Sailor's fingers curled around the edge of the command console. Earth's strategy was painfully clear now. Fight smarter, not harder. They couldn't match Korth numbers or firepower, but they didn't need to. He watched as one of the human ships jettisoned a pod filled with reflective debris, blinding a Korth cruiser's targeting sensors. Another ship latched onto a frigate's hull using magnetic clamps, boarding through a ventilation shaft. Internal footage flickered to life. Humans in armored exosuits using railguns and localized EMP bursts, disabling key systems before the Korth could regroup. They boarded a cruiser with a cargo hauler, Trellis said in disbelief. And they were winning. More troubling still, human transmissions filled the comms. Tactical chatter, jokes, encouragement. One voice broke through the encryption entirely. A calm, confident voice in Galactic Common. This is Earth Defense Command. To all Korth vessels, we do not fear you. We know you now. And we adapt faster than you can react. The bridge went silent. Even the hum of the engines felt muted beneath that quiet declaration. Salor's face darkened. They're not just soldiers, they're strategists, engineers, hackers. Every civilian on that planet might be a weapon. He turned to Trellis. Prepare the second fleet, initiate tactical retreat. Not a full withdrawal, just enough to regroup. Retreat, she echoed. Adapt, he corrected. They've shown us how. As the Korth ships pulled back toward the edge of Earth's orbit, the battlefield behind them glowed with wreckage, both human and Korth alike. But the balance had shifted. For the first time in centuries, the Korth had been pushed back, and Earth had proven it wasn't fighting to survive, it was fighting to win. The battlefield drifted in silence. Korth cruisers floated at the edge of Earth's orbit like vultures circling a wounded animal, only this time the prey had drawn blood. Commander Zaylor stood motionless on the Indomitable's bridge, watching recovery drones pull the scorched wreckage of a destroyed human ship toward their hangar. The Earth vessel had been disabled during the battle, but not before its pilot had ejected a data capsule toward the Korth fleet. Now, that capsule was decrypted and displayed on the bridge's main holoscreen. It wasn't military data, no fleet coordinates, no threat assessment. It was a message, a recording. The screen flickered, then resolved into the image of a child. Human, maybe 10 Earth years old. Brown eyes, dirt-streaked face, standing in front of a crumbling house, half buried in rubble. I don't know if you're listening, the girl said, her voice wavering but clear. But I want you to know something. My name is Lila. You took my parents. You took my brother. You can keep sending your machines, your ships, your monsters. But I'm still here. She took a breath, lifting her chin. We're all still here. And we won't stop fighting. Not because we have weapons or because we're strong, but because we have to. Because this is our home. And we don't lose it without a fight. The screen went black. No threats. No rage. Just a voice, soft and determined, echoing across the stars. The bridge crew was silent. Trellis broke the stillness. That wasn't a soldier. No, Zaylor murmured. But it was more dangerous than one. He had commanded entire planets into submission. He had broken rebellions with orbital bombardments. He had seen species cry, beg, burn. But never. Had he heard something like this? Pure, unfiltered defiance from a child who had lost everything? It rattled him. She's not unique, Trellis added, scanning intercepted Earth transmissions. There are thousands more like her. Civilians taking up arms, engineers converting factories into weapons labs, artists turning propaganda into strategy. They're fighting not just with tools, but with meaning. Zaylor's eyes narrowed. Emotion. Unity, their greatest weakness, has become their strength. He turned away from the screen, thoughts racing. The Korth Empire thrived on structure, on control, on dominance through fear. Humanity? They were chaos incarnate, flawed, emotional, unpredictable, and that made them dangerous. They have no centralized command, Treeless said. But they act like one. We can't break them the way we've broken others. Because they don't fight for survival, Zaylor said slowly. They fight for each other. At that moment, another signal pinged across the Korth network. Earth's Defense Command had released the message of the girl publicly, broadcasted into deep space. Not just for Korth ears, but for the galaxy. Call to all who had been conquered, all who had remained silent. Earth would not kneel. Zaylor looked again at the planet below, a world scarred but still burning bright. He felt something unfamiliar, something he hadn't known in decades. Doubt. Prepare a secure channel to the War Council, he said quietly. Trellis turned to him, uncertain. You're going to request reinforcements? No. He stared down at Earth. I'm going to ask what they fear more, our defeat, or their example. Because if Earth's spirit spread, the Korth would be facing a battle not just for a planet, but for the soul of an empire. A storm gathered above Earth. Korth dreadnoughts aligned in perfect formation, casting long shadows over the upper atmosphere. Reinforcements had arrived. The War Council had responded not with fear, but with fury. To them, Earth was no longer just a target. It was a symbol of defiance that had to be erased before its courage became contagious. Commander Zaylor stood at the center of the storm, the weight of both pride and uncertainty on his shoulders. His orders were clear: break Earth's resistance, shatter their resolve, end the message before it spread further across the stars. All ships in position, Trellis reported. Orbital cannons primed, ground deployment ready. Zaylor nodded once. Begin the assault. The sky over Earth turned to fire. Rods from orbit rained down like angry gods, precision strikes aimed at known resistance hubs, factories, and power grids. The planet's crust shuddered as explosions rippled across its surface. Smoke choked the skies and satellite networks collapsed in burning trails. And yet, the resistance didn't break. In underground bunkers beneath scorched cities, in forests burned bare, in shattered homes and hidden command posts, humanity rose from the rubble once more, not with overwhelming force but with conviction. In New Eurasia, a civilian comms engineer hijacked a Korth frequency, broadcasting tactical updates to human cells using a modded karaoke machine and a weather satellite. In Nairobi, a fusion reactor, on the brink of failure, was stabilized by high school students who had trained in secret, repurposing a VR classroom into a tactical energy hub. In the ruins of Toronto, an old soldier and a gang of former street racers turned abandoned cars into mobile anti-aircraft units, one of which shot down a Korth bomber using a jury-rigged plasma cannon mounted on a tow truck. This shouldn't be possible, Trellis whispered. They're outgunned 100 to 1, but they're holding. Zaylor said nothing. He watched, jaw tight, as a human fleet, small, patched together, half of it running on spare parts, rose again to meet the Korth in orbit. Their formation wasn't military, but it had purpose, patterns, trust. On the surface, a final stand erupted in what was left of Earth's largest military base. Korth troops descended in waves, but were met by human resistance fighters who refused to retreat. Men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, veterans, scientists, farmers, teenagers, each one armed with stolen tech and iron will. In the middle of it all, Zaylor saw her, the girl from the message. Lila, barely taller than the Korth soldier standing before her, had taken up a radio pack. She wasn't fighting with a weapon. She was relaying orders, patching wounded, holding her people together. When her eyes lifted toward the Korth gunship above, she didn't flinch. Zaylor watched through a live feed from the forward scout droids, and something inside him twisted. She didn't look like a threat, but she was the war. All units, Trellis said suddenly, voice tight. They're pushing back across all fronts. Sir, We might lose this. For the first time in his long career, Commander Zalor saw it not as a failure of command, but the emergence of something new, not victory, not defeat. A turning point. He looked down at Earth, burning, bloodied, unbroken, and he finally understood. They weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to be remembered. The Korth War Council watched in stunned silence as the final transmission played on the grand holoscreen within their imperial chamber. It was not a surrender. It was not a plea. It was a compilation. A human message, assembled from intercepted footage, resistance broadcasts, and battlefield recordings, stitched together by someone who understood that the war for Earth was bigger than weapons and tactics. It was a story. The video opened with images of burning cities, Korth ships looming over the skies. Then came the counter-images, humans rising from rubble, forming resistance lines, tending to the wounded. Engineers, crafting weapons from junk. Farmers digging trenches where crops once grew. Children carrying messages between fighters through tunnels carved into the bones of old subway systems. Then the voice began. Not a soldier's, not a politician's. It was Lila, her voice now steady, older, hardened but hopeful. You thought we would break. You thought fire would silence us, but it only lit the signal. You came for a planet. You found a people. The feed showed Korth cruisers falling, not by superior firepower, but by sabotage, clever timing, and human sacrifice. It showed enemy tech reverse-engineered in makeshift labs. It showed a fleet of battered human ships punching through the Korth blockade, broadcasting their location to the stars. We are Earth. We are every voice you tried to silence, every world you subjugated, and now, we're calling them. Zalor stood before the War Council, silent. He didn't need to explain. The message had spoken louder than any report. Across the galaxy, worlds long under Korth control were beginning to stir. The resistance was no longer confined to Earth. It had become contagious. Small rebellions flared on the outer colonies. Old allies began to waver. In just weeks, the Korth Empire had shifted from absolute control to defensive posture. One of the counselors growled, "This is a virus. Their defiance is spreading." "No," Zalor said softly. "It's a message. The humans had done the unthinkable. Not just survived, not just resisted. They had rewritten the narrative." Trellis approached him later on the Indomitable's bridge, her voice low. Word from the outer systems. Darnax Prime, Gortal, Nixar Station, uprisings, coordinated ones, using human tactics. He nodded. He expected as much. Should we prepare to retaliate? Zalor looked out at Earth, still scarred but shining. With lights again, cities rebuilding, skies clearing. He shook his head. No, we prepare to listen. It was over, not the war, but the old way of ruling. The Korth, feared for centuries, were now confronted by something they couldn't conquer. An idea. An idea born in fire, carried by a child's voice, and etched into every corner of the stars. A single message, broadcast from a battered world, had altered the fate of an empire. As Earth slowly turned below, its people began reaching out, not with weapons, but with messages of unity to other oppressed worlds. And for the first time, the galaxy didn't turn away. It listened. Because Earth wasn't just the next target, it had become the first spark.